Morning everyone, welcome to the second session that MDUK is running this morning. This one's on financial assistance. Again, we'll just give people a few minutes to log in. I can see people joining us as I speak, so we'll be starting shortly, but yeah, I'll give people a few seconds to continue joining us. Good morning if you've just joined us. We are shortly we'll start the financial assistance session this morning. I'm just going to give people a few more seconds to join us. I can see the numbers still rising, so we'll be with us. We'll start shortly, so just bear with us for a couple more seconds. Right, so I think the numbers are leveling off. So I'll start us off now. We're just gone past 11:30. So thank you very much for joining us this morning, and welcome to the second of two online seminars that we're holding this morning as part of our Muscles Matter 2021 online seminar series. And apologies if you've joined us for the first one, because you may hear some familiar remarks from me over the next couple of minutes. We're building on the success of our 2020 series, and we've taken account of the feedback that was provided by people who took part in that. And so the Muscle Matters seminars are going to become a regular feature in our calendar. And we're hoping that they won't replace our live events that we would have run prior to COVID, but that they'll run alongside those events when we can host those again. But it's fantastic to be able to bring everyone together even virtually again now. Over the next 12 months, we'll run 2 or 3 seminars a month, and they will focus on a range of general and condition-specific topics. So that includes sessions that you told us you found the most useful on things like research, practical and financial support, and managing your condition. And each seminar will have space for Q&A, which I'll talk about in a couple of seconds. I think it's really important just to note that our helpline remains available to anyone affected by a muscle wasting condition, and we'll share the details a few times throughout this session. We can help with information, and we can either support you directly or point you to where you can get the support you're requiring. We can be reached on 0800 652 6352 or via info@musculardystrophyuk.org. So in this session this morning, we're focusing on financial assistance, and I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Fitzgerald and Jackie Monroe from MDUK's Information Advocacy and Support team, who will provide an overview of the support that might be available to you and how you can access it before taking any questions. So before we begin, a quick note on how you can ask those questions or indeed make comments throughout the session. So many of you have submitted questions in advance, and we'll seek to cover these a bit later. We'd also like to incorporate some live input. And to do that, we're using the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. So if you do have any questions or comments as we go through the session, please just click on that and type in your comment, and I'll feed it into the discussion as we go forward. To help us manage the technical side of the event, we won't be calling on questioners to ask their questions directly. And any that we can't answer or we don't have time to cover, we'll seek to come back to individuals or post something on our website if it's a sort of a general query. And the final thing for me is just a reminder that we're recording the session and that it will be made available over the next few days. So that's all from me for now. So I'd like to hand over to Jackie Monroe to start us off, please, and we'll be sharing some slides as well. So Jackie, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Could I just get the next slide, please? Okay. Hi, so morning everyone. So my name's Jackie Monroe and I'm the Regional Information and Advocacy Manager for Scotland. So I just wanted to begin today by providing a brief overview of some of the support which we provide at Muscular Dystrophy UK and how you can access this. So as Rob mentioned, you can contact us on our helpline, which is currently open from Monday to Friday, 10 AM to 2 PM, or you can send us an email to our info inbox. So we're able to provide advice and information over the phone in relation to financial and practical support, but we also support with many other areas which I'll discuss a bit later. So we're here to answer any questions that you might have, and if we can't answer your questions, we can always signpost onto other organisations that can. We also have lots of publications and resources available, which we can email out or post out to you. So this includes condition-specific fact sheets, alert cards, information guides, and our adaptations and education manuals. So you can see from this slide that for the last financial year, our team responded to over 2,000 requests for supports and advocacy. And since the beginning of this financial year, we've so far responded to over 300 requests for support and advocacy. Next slide, please. So with regards to our advocacy service, we have 3 advocacy officers who are based in the devolved nations. So there's myself, who's based in Scotland. There's my colleague Sam, who will also be speaking later, who's based in Wales, and our colleague Demelza, who's in Northern Ireland. So we then have 2 advocacy officers, Beth and Kiri, who are usually based in our head office in London, and they support individuals living in England. So we all have experience in supporting people with muscle wasting conditions and their families, and our role is to support people to make sure they are able to access everything which they're entitled to, and to provide any relevant information and advice in relation to this. Next slide, please. So what are the issues that we can support with? So we support people to access the correct benefits, again, which we'll discuss in more detail later on in the presentation. But we also support with issues surrounding care packages. So this might include liaising with social services and supporting with continuing healthcare. We provide support in education. So this could be supporting with situations surrounding education, health and care plans, also known as EHCPs. We support in employment, including the access to work scheme and any reasonable adjustments. We assist people with accessing occupational therapy assessments and any equipment from their local authority or health board. We can provide support with housing adaptations, which includes DFG applications, so disabled facility grant applications. And finally, some of the other areas we support with is blue badge applications, transport schemes, and allocated disabled parking bays. So just to point out, this is by no means an exhaustive list. So if there is something here that I haven't covered, then please do give us a call. And as we said before, if we can't advise or support, then we can connect you to other local services who can. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in order to access the advocacy service, we would need you to complete a consent form, which we can email or post out to you. So once the form's returned to us, we can allocate a caseworker, and we'll contact you as soon as we can for more information. So this can take a little bit longer during busier times, but if you need a more urgent response from us because of deadlines, you can always let us know. And then depending on what support you require, we can assist with appeals against unfair decisions, communicate with relevant organisations to represent your views and concerns, help you understand what you might be entitled to and how to access support, provide information about neuromuscular conditions where appropriate to help others understand. And so overall, we provide comprehensive support to assist you in working towards your desired outcome. Next slide, please. So moving more specifically onto accessing financial support, there are a number of financial benefits that you may be entitled to. So today we're going to be discussing the benefits which are detailed here on this slide. So I will be focusing on personal independence payment, also known as PIP, attendance allowance and disability living allowance, also referred to as DLA, and my colleague Sam will be discussing employment and support allowance and universal credit. And Sam will also explain towards the end what will happen if you need to challenge a decision that's been made by the DWP. So just to mention briefly, there are other benefits such as carers allowance, which we won't go into detail about today, just because of time constraints. But I would also advise people when I'm supporting with benefits to go on the government website, and they have benefit calculator tools, and they should give you an overview of everything that you may be entitled to. So they're a really good starting point in terms of any applications that you might need to make. And we can share the link to the calculators in the chat function. So you'll see in this slide that some of the benefits are means tested and others are non-means tested. So this means that some benefits will take into account income and capital, and others will ignore income and capital. Next slide, please. So that you might be aware that coronavirus affected a number of financial benefits. So for example, over the last year, the government had previously postponed all face-to-face medical assessments and were carrying out telephone assessments instead. However, the DWP has recently confirmed that face-to-face assessments will begin this month for benefits such as employment support allowance, universal credit and personal independence payment. And they'll take place again alongside paper-based and telephone assessments. So our understanding at the moment is that, and alongside this, telephone assessments will also continue to take place where appropriate. So everyone who's asked to attend a face-to-face assessment will be invited by letter, and you should be issued with clear guidance and information on what to expect at an assessment. In addition to this, the government has also issued guidance on attending face-to-face assessments, which is available on the government website. So the assessments will be held at centres with social distancing and safety measures in place and in line with any local COVID-19 restrictions. But as before, please do contact us to discuss if you have any concerns regarding this or if you would like further advice in relation to any upcoming changes to assessments. Next slide, please. So I'm firstly going to speak about the financial benefit in personal independence payment, which is also known as PIP. So PIP is a non-means tested benefit, and so it doesn't take into account any of your income or capital. It's available for people who are aged between 16 and 65. So PIP is available to support people with the additional cost of living with a long-term health condition or disability. And the amount of money you will receive depends on how your condition affects you under two components of PIP. So these are the daily living component and the mobility component. So as some of you know, disability living allowance, which is also known as DLA, for adults is in the process of being phased out and replaced by personal independence payment. So if you're still currently receiving DLA, you may eventually need to apply for PIP, but only when you've been asked to do so by the Department for Work and Pensions. Next slide, please. So the daily living component of PIP looks at if you have any difficulties with activities such as washing and bathing, dressing and undressing, preparing food, taking nutrition and so forth. The mobility component looks at if you have any difficulties with walking. So this would take into consideration if you use any aids to support you when walking, and if you are to experience fatigue or are prone to trips and falls due to poor balance or muscle weakness. So you can be awarded one or both components, and you can either be awarded the standard rate or the enhanced rate. So you need 8 points to be awarded the standard rate, and you need 12 points to be awarded the enhanced rate. So you'll be awarded PIP for a set amount of time. So for example, 3 to 4 years, and then you'd usually be reassessed. And this is the same with the majority of the benefits that we'll be talking about today. So just to point out, we have heard more recently of people being awarded for much longer than the kind of standard 3 to 4 years. So this is really positive as people haven't needed to go through the reassessment process after such a short period of time. Next slide, please. So this is the current process for applying for PIP. So firstly, you need to contact the PIP application line, and the DWP will post out a form called How Your Disability Affects You. So we can assist with filling out that form over the phone. So you have a limited amount of time to complete this, and once it's completed, it should be posted back to the DWP along with any additional supporting evidence that you may have from any health or social care professionals who are involved in your care. And we can also provide a letter of support if required. So once the form's been submitted, it's likely that you'll receive an appointment for an assessment with a healthcare professional. And as mentioned previously, this may be a face-to-face assessment or a telephone assessment, just depending on the circumstances. So the DWP will notify you of their decision following an assessment, and this is usually within 3 months, although we know that there is some delays at the moment just because of the ongoing situation with coronavirus. As with all benefits, there are 2 stages to appealing if you disagree with the decision. But again, Sam will go on to talk about how to challenge a benefits decision later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So we understand that muscle conditions are extremely rare and that many of the healthcare professionals that you come into contact with may never have came across them before. So because of this, we've put together a comprehensive guide about PIP to support you from the process of applying right through to appealing a PIP decision if you have to do so. So do give us a call or send us an email and we can arrange for this to be posted out to you. The PIP guide is also available electronically on our website. Next slide, please. So moving on to disability living allowance. So disability living allowance, also known as DLE, is a non-means tested benefit which is available for children aged between 0 and 16. So it's available to support children with the recognised additional cost of living with a disability. So DLE looks at if a child has difficulties with walking or requires additional care and attention than a child of the same age who does not have a condition. So the payment a child will receive depends on how the condition affects their care and mobility needs. So just to make you aware, a child who has in receipt of DLE will receive a letter inviting them to apply for PIP, usually just shortly after their 16th birthday. So they would be looking for them to transition from DLE to PIP once they turn 16. Next slide, please. So there are two components under disability living allowance, which is the care component and the mobility component. So it's very similar to PIP in that respect. And as mentioned, the amount of money the child receives depends on their care and mobility needs. So DLA is paid at low, middle, or high for the care component. And the care component looks at how much support and supervision a child requires throughout the day and the night, or the night. And with regards to the mobility component, DLE is paid at either the lower rate or the higher rate. And the mobility component looks at how the child's condition affects their ability to walk and any difficulties they may experience when walking. So it's important to note that the mobility component is only available to children who are aged over 3. Next slide, please. So this is the current process for applying for disability living allowance. So firstly, you need to call the national application line, or you can download the form available from the government website. So you can complete the form with the support from ourselves or other local organisations and post it back to the DWP. So there's no time limit for you to send this application form back to the DWP. They'll then get in contact with you and notify you of their decision. So unlike PIP, there isn't a medical assessment for disability living allowance. It's purely form-based. Therefore, it's really important that you submit any supporting evidence from your child's neuromuscular team or any health and social care professionals involved in their care. You can also keep a kind of day-to-day diary that just kind of gives you any additional information about tasks that need to be completed throughout the day. And that's just something else that you can send along with the form also. And of course, we're able to provide a letter of support for a daily application also. Next slide, please. So the final benefit that I'll be speaking about today is attendance allowance. So attendance allowance is also a non-means tested benefit, and it provides extra money to individuals who are over the state pension age, who need help with their personal care. So because it's means tested, it doesn't take into account any income or capital. So personal care can include things such as getting washed and dressed, eating and drinking, and supervision during the day or night to keep you safe. So it's based on the help that you need and not whether you're actually receiving that help. So for example, you wouldn't have to have someone who is providing that care to you to be able to apply for the benefit. And the extra money that you receive doesn't necessarily need to be spent on a carer to support you. It can be spent on whatever you choose with regards to meeting your care needs. So this could be equipment for the home to support with independence or help with bills and additional transport costs. So the additional benefit to receiving attendance allowance is that you might be able to access other financial support, such as financial credit, housing benefit, or council tax reduction. And if you already receive these, then you might be entitled to an increase in them. Next slide, please. So attendance allowance only has 2 payment rates, which is a lower and highly weekly rate. So you may be entitled to the lower rate if you need frequent, which is several times a day, help or supervision throughout the day or night. And you may be entitled to the higher prolonged or continual help or supervision throughout the day and night. Next slide, please. So just to finish off, this is the current process for applying for attendance allowance. So firstly, you need to contact the attendance allowance helpline or download the form online from the government website. You can complete the form with support from ourselves or another local support organisation and send it back to the DWP. So as before, it's really important to tell the DWP as much as possible about how your condition is affecting your care needs. Unlike PIP, there isn't a medical assessment with attendance allowance. It's based on the information given on the application form and also any supporting evidence that you submit when applying. So again, our team are able to provide with advice and support with the form. and we can also provide you with a supporting letter. So once the form has been received by the DWP, they will review the claim and then notify you of their decision. So with regards to all the benefits that we'll be discussing today, supporting evidence is extremely important. So if you are considering applying, then it's beneficial to begin having conversations with professionals involved in your care, to request letters of support and any other appropriate evidence. If you're able to begin gathering evidence earlier in the process, then it can be a lot less stressful going forward if there's any deadlines that have to be met. So I'm just going to pass over to Sam now, who's going to discuss employment and support allowance and universal credit and what you need to do if you have to challenge a decision by the DWP. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Next slide, please. Hello, everyone. So as Jackie said, I'm Sam Fitzgerald and I'm the Advocacy Officer for Wales. And I'm going to begin by talking about employment and support allowance, or ESA. So you can apply for ESA if you have a disability or long-term health condition that affects your ability to work or how much you can work. There are some rules relating to work whilst you're claiming ESA, and those are that you can work for less than 16 hours a week. You can earn up to £143 a week after tax. You can undertake work to build up your skills and experience, or you can do voluntary work. And there's no limit on the amount of hours that you can work, you can volunteer for. And there are 3 types of ESA, as you can see on the screen. There's New Style ESA, contribution-based ESA, and income-related. Now, you may be in receipt of, or know someone who is in receipt of income-based or contribution-based ESA. However, under the new benefits system that I'm going to be talking more about, contribution-based ESA has now been replaced by New Style ESA, and income-based ESA has been replaced by universal credit. So those receiving these older style benefits will continue to receive them unless there's a change in circumstance, which means they need to move on to universal credit, or they're contacted by the DWP and invited to claim universal credit. And I'm going to be talking more about universal credit in a little while. So the type of ESA that most people can claim, as I say, is the New Style ESA. And to be eligible to claim that benefit, you must have worked as an employee or been self-employed and have paid enough national insurance contributions, usually in the last 2 to 3 years. With any of the benefits that we're talking about today, Jackie and I have covered. If you need any further help and support with these, then obviously we're happy to help on the helpline because they can be quite complex. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, the bit of ESA that I want to focus on is the assessment part. So to qualify for ESA, you will need to undertake what is called a work capability assessment. And this is done in 2 parts. There is a work capability questionnaire, which we can help and support with. And there is also a medical assessment. Now, at the moment, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the medical assessments used to be face-to-face, and at the moment, they are doing those by telephone. Now, universal credit, ESA is based on a points-based system. So if you receive sufficient points, you will be deemed to have what they call a limited capability for work. And you'll be placed then in one of 2 groups following the assessment. You'll either go into the work-related activity group, or you will go into the support group. So if you're placed in the work-related activity group, this means that you cannot work currently. However, in the future, you may be expected to make a return to work. If you're placed in the support group, this means that you cannot work now and you're not expected to work in the future. Next slide, please. So this is the current process for making an ESA application. To start the application process, you need to call the national helpline, or you can download the form from the government website. You then complete the form, which again, we can help and support with. And following that, as I say, you have a medical assessment over the phone. If you qualify, how much you get will depend on the medical assessment, how many points you score, and things like your age and whether you're able to go back into work. You'll normally get the assessment rate for the first 13 weeks while your claim is being assessed. What I would say is a caveat to this at the moment, assessments are taking longer than 13 weeks. Now, if you're currently in the process of claiming and you haven't had your assessment within the 13 weeks period, then I would contact the DWP or contact us for support and we can help you with that. We are finding that there is significant delays on those assessments at the moment. But once you've had the assessment, any additional payment that you would have been entitled to will be backdated. And again, we can help and support you to get that. So once the decision is made, as I say, you go into one of those two groups. If you're in the support group and you're currently claiming the income-related ESA, you may be entitled to additional premiums as well. So there's the enhanced disability premium and the severe disability premium, and this will equate to more money for you. So it's well worth looking into. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move on to universal credit. Universal credit is a means-tested benefit, which is paid monthly. This means that if you have more than £16,000 in savings, you are going to be eligible for universal credit. Universal credit is what's known as an in and out of work benefit. So you can claim if you work or if you are unemployed or if you're unable to work. If you live with a partner, you do have to make a joint claim regardless of your partner's circumstances. So you will both need to make a joint application. Universal credit has replaced 6 benefits, which I know the 6 benefits that you can currently see on the screen there are now what is referred to as legacy benefits. So it's not actually possible to make a brand new claim for any of those 6 benefits there. If you would previously have qualified to claim one of those benefits, you will now have to make a claim for universal credit. However, if you're currently receiving one of those 6 benefits there, you will continue to receive them unless you have a change in circumstances, which means that you have to move on to universal credit, or the DWP write to you to invite you to claim universal credit. I'm going to be giving some examples about change of circumstances shortly. And just to make you aware, similarly to when they phased out disability living allowance and brought in PIP, they're doing the same with these legacy benefits. And so at some point over the coming years, people on these benefits currently will be invited to apply for universal credit, and eventually these 6 benefits will be phased out. But I think that's probably going to take a number of years for that to happen. Next slide, please. Okay, so everyone who successfully claims universal credit receives the standard allowance. And the standard allowance rate depends on your circumstances, including your age and marital status. You can then qualify for additional elements on top of this, depending on your circumstances. Each of those elements has a monetary value attached to it. So, for example, this could be a carer's element, childcare costs element, or limited capability for work. And I'll provide more details about that on the next slide. So your monthly payment is made up of the standard allowance plus any additional payments, any additional elements that you qualify for. And you can see a full list of the rates of payments by going to the link that is on the screen there. One thing to note that it does take around 5 weeks to receive your first payment of universal credit. So if you need help with bills or other costs while you're waiting for your first universal credit payment, then you can apply to get an advance. However, it is important to note that that advance does need to be repaid, and it can be repaid over a maximum of 12 months, and you can delay the first payment by 3 months after you receive the advance, but it does have to be repaid. Okay, so the next slide, please. So here are the different elements that make up universal credit. And as I mentioned, everyone who qualifies will receive the standard rate. And then depending on circumstances, you may be entitled to one or more of those additional elements there. So you can claim additional money, for instance, if you're responsible for a child under the age of 16, that can be up to the age of 20 in some circumstances. And there's additional money if you have a child who is in receipt of disability living allowance or personal independent payments. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the limited capability for work-related activity element, snappy title, and the housing elements shortly. Okay, so the next slide, please. The application process for universal credit is slightly different to the other previous benefits. So the application process tends to be done online, where you go on to the government website, you set up an account and you fill in the online form. Now, it is possible to claim via the telephone. If you don't have access to the internet, or it's not something that you enjoy doing and it's not the way you want to do it, you can ring the Universal Credit Helpline and ask to fill it in over the phone. You may come up against some resistance when you do that, because the DWP would prefer everybody to complete this online. So you might need to be persistent. If you really feel as though, they're saying, no, you can't do it by telephone, then contact us, contact our helpline for support, and we will guide you through that and talk to the DWP to make sure that you can access it via the telephone. So if you go online and you submit and you open up your account, you then have 28 days to complete and submit your claim form. Once you've done that, you'll be allocated a work coach or a case manager who'll then guide and support you where appropriate through the process. You'll then have an interview over the telephone with Job Centre Plus, who actually manage the universal credit process, and they will take 1 month then approximately to assess your claim. They'll notify you of the decision, and approximately a week after that, you will receive your first payment. Another important thing to note is that once you start the universal credit process, your other benefits will stop. So as I previously mentioned, there is the advance available if you're experiencing financial difficulty while you're waiting for that first payment. The good thing about the online account is that you can keep in touch with your work coach or case manager and report any changes in circumstances, keep track of payments and things like that. So it is quite user-friendly. Next slide, please. I thought it might be helpful and hopefully bring this to life by talking you through a case study. Okay, so Mr. X was someone who contacted me. He was in receipt of income-based ESA, that's the old legacy benefit, and was in the support group. So he'd gone through the work capability questionnaire and assessment and had been put in the support group. He contacted me actually to help with applying for PIP, personal independent payments. And during the process of applying for PIP, he explained to me how he was keen to gain his independence. He lived with his parents and he wanted a place of his own. And so he successfully qualified for PIP and decided that now was the right time to move into his own rented accommodation, which he did. Once he was living on his own, because he was living on his own and claiming both PIP and income-based ESA, he then qualified for a severe disability premium. So under the old legacy benefits, Mr. X was claiming £180, as you can see there, £180.85 each week, which was £113.55 made up from being in the ESA support group, and another £67.30 from his severe disability premium. However, Mr. X couldn't claim housing benefit because that's, as I said on the previous slide, that's an old legacy benefit. And you can no longer apply to, you used to claim through your local authority. You can't do that anymore, except in a couple of circumstances. So for instance, if you're going into temporary accommodation or you're going into supported living, then you can claim through the local authority. But in Mr. X's case, that didn't apply to him, and he couldn't go to his local authority because they no longer handle housing benefit. So the only choice that he had to get help with his housing was, this was a change in circumstance for him. He needed to change all of his benefits across to universal credit. So the next slide, please. So I'm now supporting Mr. X to make a claim for universal credit, and this is what he should be receiving. It's important to note that Mr. X is over the age of 25 because that is it's a difference in rates. But you can see there that Mr. X will receive £409.89 as the standard award. Because he was in the support group with the old income-based ESA, he will automatically be entitled to go into the limited capability for work-related activity element under universal credit. That is the equivalent of the old support group. He won't need to do another medical. And so he will claim an additional £341.92 because of that element. Because we made sure that he had the severe disability premium before he went onto universal credit, he will get £120 in an additional payment because that was what he was claiming before as a severe disability transitional element. And finally, he is able to claim for housing. He couldn't do that under his old benefits, but because he's now on universal credit, he can claim the housing element. And that is based on his local authorities' rent assessments, and he is able to claim under his the rate for his local authority was £448.76, which will be paid through universal credit. So as you can see there, under universal credit, Mr. X is going to be £536 better off on universal credit. Now, it is important to note that for some people, they will be, better off on universal credit. Some may be worse off. And so it's really important, this is the key message, is to seek advice before you submit your claim. And the before is highlighted because once you submit a claim once you hit the submit button on your account for universal credit, you can no longer go back. You can't change your mind and say, I want to go back to the old legacy benefits because I'm worse off. There is no going back. So it is really key that you seek advice as to whether or not you're going to be better off on universal credit. Okay, so the next slide, please. So the final bit that I wanted to talk about was challenging a decision. So with all of these benefits, as you can see, they're very complex. And sometimes the wrong decision is made, particularly, I think, when we're dealing with rarer conditions. People don't necessarily feel that their condition is understood correctly during assessments. So sometimes you do need to challenge. And that's a two-stage process for appealing a benefit. So the first stage of appealing is called mandatory reconsideration. And that takes place internally. That is when the Department for Work and Pensions looks again at the decision that it's made. Okay, and you do have an opportunity at that stage to send in any additional medical evidence or indeed a supporting letter from ourselves. If you're still unsuccessful at that stage, and it can be quite difficult to get the DWP to, if you like, admit they were wrong. So if you're still unsuccessful or you disagree with the decision, then you do have the chance to appeal the decision and take it to tribunal. Tribunal hearing is held by Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, who are external to the Department for Work and Pensions. And the hearing is made up of a panel. Usually there is a judge, a doctor, and someone from a welfare benefits background. And they will ask you to, if it's prior to COVID and hopefully after COVID, it's a face-to-face hearing where you were able to talk to the panel, where they looked at all the evidence in front of them and came to a decision. However, at the moment, due to coronavirus, it's not possible to have that panel and to go and face-to-face with that panel. So you'll usually have your case assessed without a hearing. It'll usually be based on the documents that you provide. If the panel assesses your case on the documents, you'll get a provisional decision. And if you don't agree with that provisional decision, you can ask the tribunal, you can let the tribunal know, and they will have a hearing instead. And at that hearing, the tribunal, it might be done over the telephone or video conferencing, but then you should have a chance to put your case forward as well. But we can support you at any stage with challenging a financial benefit decision. So do get in touch with us. And I'm just going to leave you with the final slide, which has our contact details on for our helpline again, so that if you want to know more or you want help applying for any of the benefits that Jackie and I have discussed, then do get in touch with us. We are happy to help. We are here to help. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Jackie. I think, yeah, to reiterate Sam's final point there about the helpline, definitely get in touch with, Sam and Jackie did a great job there at giving us a kind of concise overview of what is a very complex landscape. So we're definitely here to help and advise you through that, and it's a free service. So do get in touch if you need us. Sam and Jackie, thank you so much. We've got a few minutes for questions, and so I'll go straight to those. And then we'll sort of work through. But if you do have a question, a reminder to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I think both of you talked about, in the benefits you covered, talked about the sort of time frame that benefits were awarded for. But someone's come forward with a question of, they've heard that they can only claim ESA for a year. I think, Sam, is that true? That's one for you, I think.
Yeah, that is true. The new style ESA or contribution-based ESA is only for a year. What I would absolutely reiterate here is that this is why it's so important to get your work capability assessment done, because if you are successful at getting into the support group, if you have enough points to get into the support group, it will go beyond, you can then claim it beyond the year. So if you are currently claiming it and you're sort of 9 months in and you still haven't had your work capability assessment, then do get in touch with us or get in touch with the DWP, because it's key that you get that assessment done. Otherwise, once the year runs out, if you're not in that support group, you will then have to transition onto universal credit. Great,
thank you. And we've had a question just come through the Q&A function. So a question from Karen. If you're 64 and claiming PIP when 65, would you automatically qualify for attendance allowance, or do you have to claim again? So it's quite a good question about whether you're automatically transferred across to benefits, or whether actually you'll need to do something proactively.
I'm happy to pick that one up. So if you're 64 and claiming PIP, you will continue to claim PIP after you turn 65. Well, actually it's 66 at the moment because it's based on state pension age, but you will continue to receive PIP. The one caveat to that, so you don't need to apply for attendance allowance. The one caveat to that, which may seem slightly unfair, is that at the moment, if when you get to 64, 65, you are in receipt of the standard mobility rate, once you reach state pension age, if your mobility deteriorates, they will not reassess it and give you the enhanced rate. So it's important to make sure that you're on the correct rates around mobility before you reach state pension age. The care can change, but the mobility, whatever you were assessed as needing when you reach state pension age is what you will continue to receive afterwards. It does seem a bit unfair, but I think it's mainly based around the fact that for those who apply for the first time at state pension age, they would claim attendance allowance, and there's no mobility at all for attendance allowance.
Thanks, Sam. Jackie, I'm going to come to you next because I'm going to pick up on something you said in your presentation, but this may be for both of you actually. I think for a long time we've sort of been highlighting that people with a muscle wasting condition don't get better. It's a deteriorating condition, and therefore they're kind of why put people through the stress of a reassessment. And Jackie, I think you mentioned that we're coming across sort of longer awards now for PIP. Is that anecdotal, or do we think is there a change in approach that actually means people are going to get longer awards moving forward?
Yeah, so I definitely think that there's been a change in people who have long-term conditions being awarded longer awards, which is so positive, because sometimes by the time you go through the process, you're reassessed just a short time after as well. So I really think that that's reflective of a change in approach and a kind of acknowledgement that, you know, it is a long-term condition, and the purpose of reassessments to see if anything has kind of changed in terms of deterioration, but also to see if anything has improved. And we know obviously with muscle conditions that's not the case. So so you know, we really kind of back having longer awards, and I've certainly came in contact with quite a few people now who have been awarded for 10 years, I believe. But that still doesn't seem to be consistent yet, but it's positive that it is happening.
I would say actually that what is tending to happen now is where people receive the enhanced mobility and the enhanced daily living, so the highest rates that you can get, and they have a progressive condition, the DWP are tending to award for 10 years, because I think they're finally recognizing the fact that if you're getting the maximum benefit and you've got a progressive condition, there's really no point in reassessing every 3 to 4 years. So that is where they're moving towards now.
Great, thank you. That is reassuring to hear actually as well, isn't it? Because it's certainly something that I've heard before about that, you know, incredulity that you might be assessed to find your conditions got better. Jackie, we've talked. I had a couple of questions about sort of issues at sort of state pension age, but at the other end of the scale, we've had a question through from someone who says they've got a 3-year-old child with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and would they get the mobility part of DLA?
So something that's really frustrating is you can apply for it from 3 years old. My experience has always been it's quite challenging at that age to try and get the mobility component of DLA, and the reason for that is that the DWPs have been advised, you know, that there's children of a similar age who may not yet be walking, and so it's really hard to evidence what the reason behind that is. So you can apply for it from 3 years old, but it's challenging to get. But again, it's all to do with kind of medical evidence, and we can support with liaison, communicating with the DWP about why, you know, why the mobility component would be relevant in that case.
It's interesting you mentioned evidence, because I was going to that was a big theme that came up in our care packages session this morning, was the sort of importance of the evidence thing. So sort of by and large, is that often one of the issues that people come to us with, that, you know, there's been a bit of a sort of barrier between being able to prove the need, and actually that often that's resolved if you can source the right evidence?
So I think it's about kind of
Oh, sorry, Jackie, you've managed to mute yourself. Sorry.
The conversations that I have are surrounding fatigue, and we know that trying to evidence the variability of conditions as well. You know, so for example, because a child could do it one day, what is the long-term impact of that over the next 3 to 4 days? You know, so it may be that one day, you know, it's not as much of a difficulty, but then the 3-4 days after that, fatigue is a huge issue, and it really severely affects mobility. So it's about trying to provide the details, the specific details about how it impacts on their mobility. And, you know, I always kind of advise families to speak with consultants and physiotherapy and anyone who can provide evidence to provide that finer detail about why, about, you know, why the mobility difficulties are there.
Right, thank you. And Sam, I'm going to come back on something you said in your presentation. I thought was very interesting in terms of just being sure about what you might be entitled to before you apply for universal credit. And just is it easy to be sort of fairly certain to make that assessment? Is that something we help people with, or is there an element of the process may sort of come up with a different answer? How secure can people be in that knowledge before they make that decision, do you think?
It is such a complex benefit. I mean, it's surprising that they brought in universal credit to try and simplify the benefit system. but it is incredibly complex, and the calculations, there are so many things to take into consideration that, you know, I certainly wouldn't advise people to just go onto a website and try and figure out what it is that they're entitled to, because inevitably there's so many exceptions and rules behind the scenes that could ultimately impact on the final decision. And as I say, once you've submitted it, you can't go back and say, oh, I made a mistake, I want my old benefits back. So I think it is important to seek advice from someone that does know how to assess your benefits and to give you a realistic expectation about what you can expect to receive. As Jackie mentioned earlier on, you know, if people want to have a basic guide and rough idea, there are benefit calculators that people can go to on the gov.uk website that really, you know, do help. You have to input all your personal details, your savings, etc., but they do give you a realistic and fairly accurate result as to what you can expect. But absolutely, with universal credit particularly, I would always recommend seeking advice.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got one final question at the moment, but there's time if anyone wants to feed one in through the Q&A function. You've still got a couple of minutes left if you want to do that. But the final question for now, I think, is one for you, Jackie, which is, can someone apply for attendance allowance if they don't have a carer?
Yes, yeah. So yep, so I kind of mentioned earlier on as well, is it's to do with how the care that you need, not necessarily that the care that you're receiving. So it could be that you're having difficulties with specific areas in certain activities, and it's to do with how your condition impacts on that. So you don't have to have kind of care in place or anyone providing that level of support, but you can still apply for the benefit and you're entitled to it because of that. And as I said, you can use that to pay for equipment or anything that can support you with meeting your care needs.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both very much for your time this morning, and thank you to those of you who've joined to take part and for your questions. That was a great session, and yeah, you've really distilled what is a very complex bit of information down into a really sort of helpful summary. But I think I'll end by reiterating the fact that the helpline is here, and you can speak to Jackie, Sam, or one of our other colleagues directly if you have any further questions. So thank you very much. That's the first two of our Muscle Matters 2021 seminars complete. There's details on the website of future sessions. So do please take a look and let us know if you'll be joining us. And without further ado, I'll say goodbye. So thank you very much and take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.